Most citizens in northeastern Oklahoma are familiar with the Price Tower, but not everyone has been inside to see this wonderful cloisonne mural that was added in 1979 by artist Pauli Lane. Pauli's my guest today for Focus on Art. I'm Barbara Cohen-Air. Lane is now a citizen of Oklahoma. She recently moved to Stillwater, so we're delighted to have her here in northeastern Oklahoma. Pauli, welcome to Oklahoma and to Focus on Art.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm very happy to be here.
Well, we're happy to have you back in our state. Obviously, you were here in 1979 when you were doing this particular mural.
And I loved being in Oklahoma then and decided to return.
Well, that's wonderful. I'd like to begin by just asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself. You've traveled quite a bit and lived in a number of places and so forth.
Well, I'll start back with college. I went to Kent State University in Kent, Ohio, my bachelor's degree and my master's degree. And then I was very happy to be able to go up to the Cleveland Institute of Art, where I really learned how to be a professional artist.
And you've been doing that ever since?
Yes. I studied silversmithing, enameling, and sculpture in Cleveland.
Okay, so you're really a three-dimensional person. You really like things that come and go in space, I guess.
Right, yes.
Okay, now you moved your studio out to Phoenix and then up to the more northern part of the state when the right people came up and asked you to do this mural.
That's right. I was up in Prescott, Arizona.
All right.
And I had been down in the valley at Arizona State University, and I taught enameling, and then I moved up to Yavapai County, where Prescott is, and I taught enameling and stained glass.
All right. What did they say to you when they came in and asked you to do this mural? They just say, we have a building in Oklahoma and we need a mural?
Yes, more or less. They said we had this building that Mr. Wright had built in 1952 and asked me if I thought I could do a mural. I said, well, could I come down and talk? And I said, no, because I'm having a show up here now, and if you'd like to come up and see the work, then we can decide whether you think I'm the person to do it.
Well, I think you are absolutely the person to do this. This mural is perfect for this building. Let's take a look at it and let you tell us a little bit about what it's made out of and maybe explain the idea of cloisonne for our viewers. Okay?
All right.
Okay, let's just go over here. And first of all, I think we noticed the copper.
Yes. Mr. Wright's designs basically have always been angles, 30, 60, 90 degree angles. And that's what all of these designs are. And this design came out of a very small pencil sketch. And the idea was to make it look like a cloisonne, even though it's not totally a cloisonne, because a cloisonne is, the wiring is fired. This is kind of a pseudo. So I had to figure out the ways of enclosing these pieces of enamel. And it's all totally copper except for these strips, which are brass.
All right. And then the enameling is done on separate pieces that are set on top of that copper background? Is that right?
They're set on top of the enamel is on copper, and all of these pieces were done in one kiln and at one piece at a time. But the largest piece that you could do couldn't be any larger than 18 inches, because in enamels you can only fire what you can lift in and out of a kiln, and it only takes 2 or 3 minutes to fire it, so it's a very rapid operation. Having been an instructor at Yavapai College at the time, I was able to get students that could kind of saw these little things out by the hundreds. But the rest of it I did all by myself. And I brought all of these pieces to Bartlesville and started assembling the mural. The pieces actually, the brass runners, the enamel strips slide into, and that helps to keep them in their position.
Okay, so I noticed that everything is very, very flat, so the the groove, so to speak, in the runner is keeping that in place.
Yes.
All right. Well, we're very fortunate that we not only have the mural to look at today, Pauli also has an exhibit at the Bartlesville Museum. So Pauli, what I'd like to do now is go and look at some of your other work.
All right. Barbara, in this case we have some cloisonne and some jewelry. In the top we have the cross, which is the dove of peace, the lamb, the mother and child, and the fish, the mother and child. Now that is cloisonne because the silver wires actually enclose the cloisonne, which is the enamel. In this plate we have the same process, but we torched the outside and made it look more fuzzy like a spider web.
Now, what do you mean by torch?
An acetylene torch.
So you actually
It's
just
like
got in there
a lady
and just melted
welder. Yes, just like a lady welder. And we can then actually in this shelf we have some retrospective pieces that I did early in my graduate work, and those are stones actually mounted. And then we go down. This is more of the graduate work and some other pieces that are later. This last piece down here of the cat is Amber and her two kittens, and that was commissioned by Hallmark.
And what did Hallmark do with that? Did they make a series of those plates?
Actually, we were going to make a series of them, and generally when you get going on a project, the countries have a problem with somebody else, and so it sort of dwindles out. So that's what happened to that.
Okay, well, it's a gorgeous plate. Now, you have some works over here, Pauli, that look to me like perhaps you used the torch again on these particular pieces.
Yes.
Is that what's happened here on the tops of these pieces in the top
That's
shelf?
done with an acetylene torch. Over on that side, you have those bowls. Actually, I picked up in Mexico. I used to go down to Guadalajara and go up to Santa Clara in the mountains, buy the pieces from the men that were working on them, bring them back and torch the edges with an acetylene torch and then enamel. Now it isn't how much enamel you put on them, because you can see the undercoat bleeding through on the one bowl. It's not the amount you use, it's how many very light coats that you use, and some of those might have 12 fire rings. Wow. Then you can come down to, this is kind of one of my favorites. It's actually a transparent blue with the turquoise opaque enamel over the outside.
Pauli, are these bowls all copper?
They're all copper.
Okay.
You have to use pure silver, 18 karat gold, or copper, high-grade copper.
Okay.
On this shelf you have some pieces of gold. They're not enameled. It's pounded. Some of these are pounded gold. This one has a pearl. The tiny little bowls were from Mexico. Any of these kind of squatty ones are Mexicans. These are just hand spun, and then the torching applied.
All right, well, just beautiful things in this case. Now on the bottom shelf too, I think that wonderful large bowl that's in the middle on the back.
The large bowl in the middle and the back is the last piece that I had fired. It's pretty heavy, and actually when you're working in enamel, it's just what you can lift yourself. And if things get larger than that, you can't enamel them, because most kilns are not large enough.
And it's a very quick process.
Very fast, just seconds it takes.
Well, now, Pauli, in this case over here, we have some more wonderful things. Gosh, I'm almost run out of adjectives here, I think. These are just gorgeous. This particular case has a number of things that have a sunflower motif. Let's talk about that.
Yes, my grandmother came out from Indiana to teach school in 1883 in Kansas, and I've been in Kansas many times and love sunflowers. And this piece has in it pure gold foil, and it's underneath the color, actually.
Okay, now I might ask you this question. Enamel is transparent.
Yes.
So that allows us to see the gold through that color.
The brown is transparent. This turquoise here is opaque. Under the turquoise is a periwinkle blue, fired first, which gives it that kind of rosy cast under the turquoise. This piece over here, actually, I painted the design on with a brush, little grain by grain of enamel. And that's how that one happens to look a little differently from this one over here, which is a stencil. This piece here was done with a transparent yellow with an orange over it, and it has the torched edge.
And then this last piece, this kind of almost looks like a blue sunflower.
This blue flower has the little pink and the blue, and I think it would make a dandy puzzle because no little leaf is the same.
Wonderful. Now, not all of your work is three-dimensional. On the wall, we have some examples of some murals that you've done. When did you do these, Pauli?
These murals were done after the one in the other room, and the reasoning behind it is that they're made of paper, and paper is much, much less expensive, and this makes it an affordable piece of art. And it could be used for corporations or businesses or for a home. And the designs intermingle, so you can own 1 or 3 or 6 pieces. The designs all go together.
So you just buy enough sections to cover the size wall you have?
Just for the size you want. And,
okay. How about
and they
this
could
other
be
one?
Commissioned in any size, actually.
All right.
Over here you have the white on white and silver, and this just shows you the depth of designs, and there are 14 designs, and they intermingle any way you want to position them.
If someone wanted to commission, say, the same design, but each panel twice the size, do you do that kind of thing?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Well, these are just wonderful, too. Now we have another whole room, so we don't want to short the wonderful works of art that are in that area.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Well, one thing for sure, Pauli, I think our guests are going to be amazed at the number of different media that you work with. Here we have some gorgeous stained glass windows. Tell us a little bit about this part of your artistic career.
All right. These doors came from Will Rogers Jr.'s home down in Tubac. They were having an auction or a sale or something like that. And I fell in love with the old doors and bought them, and they had originally just old glass in them. And it just seemed to me they'd make lovely garden doors, so I created the idea of a tulip. And I've used that idea in several homes where people wanted flowers in their house.
Oh, this is wonderful. Has a really kind of a Nouveau or a Deco feel, I think, in the design that really is very compatible with the doors. And I'm sure you planned that.
Oh, well, sure.
Absolutely. Now, did you actually make these stained glass doors?
I didn't make these. I commissioned a glass company to
So you did
create
the design.
them. I did the designs. Because when you do designs in windows, they have to be rain-tight, airtight, and so forth. And these various companies know more how to go about that.
right,
I'm just the designer.
All right. Now, you've designed some church windows.
Yes,
too.
I've designed 12 windows in the Christian Science Church in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and they're about so wide, and they are faceted glass, which is heavy, thick glass laid in concrete, and it actually becomes a wall. And then I've done the windows in the little Danforth Chapel at ASU, Arizona State University, and another church in Scottsdale.
Wonderful. Well, your talents just go on and on. Now, these, I think, like I said, kind of have a little period look to them, but this particular door is extremely contemporary. Tell us about this one, Pauli.
Well, this is kind of fun. The door came from Skull Valley, Arizona, which is about 5,000 feet in the ranching country, and it's an actual door from an old farmhouse. And it seemed like a fun thing to do to correlate the glass and the enamel, see how the colors work, because they're really the same properties. They're all silicon. So down here is a mouse hole. And in one I did, it had big spider webs and a spider that went around in a circle. So
Okay, now did a real mouse make that hole down there? Is that what you're telling us?
I think so. It was a pretty beat up old door.
Okay, well these are wonderful colors. And this of course looks to me very much like something that would come from the American Southwest. It's just fantastic. Now, are you using this on your own house, or is this someone else's?
I have used it in my own house, yes. And then I went from this idea to the church window ideas, mainly because of the commissions. And then we go over here. This was a piece that was in a show at the Hurd Museum in Phoenix, Arizona. And here again, I use the idea of the tiny bits of glass, but before I knew how to mount glass, I just cut these little halons of copper out with a torch and then glued the glass to the back. And this whole piece was seen in a show and commissioned by Hallmarks to make puzzles. And so they're your 500 easy pieces. And they made thousands of these, but it's fun.
Oh, it's great. Now, I'm not sure this is such an easy puzzle. I mean, you'd have all these black pieces.
Well, I've never really tried it.
Well, that's great. Well, it's interesting how with a truly creative person, you do something like a door, you have some basic design motifs there, some basic color ideas, translates itself into a wall mural, and then we go from a wall mural to a puzzle.
And if you'll notice, the coloring used in these enamels are the same that are used in these enamels. And they're all opaque. But it's just the idea of how you put it together, what comes to you.
Okay, well, certainly wonderful things. Now we have another wall hanging, and this is an entirely enameled piece. Was this a little bit later than the piece we were just looking at, Pauli?
I think it was earlier. It reminded me of the flags on the boats going down the Rhine River, and it's the German color flag. And I was impressed by how those three colors were used together.
You must have done that after a trip to Europe.
Right. Barbara, these are my boys at the ages of 5 and 8, and they're very quiet eating their breakfast.
A wonderful way to have boys, very quiet and on the wall, right?
Right on the wall, that's right.
Okay, and this is enamel too. It looks like it's
enamel, and actually the outline is done with enamel, a wet enamel, like a pen, but it's done with a crow quill pen.
Okay, and I would assume that this is kind of early in your career.
This was early, and it's kind of one of my keepsakes. That's one way to keep your boys at home.
And keep them
after
quiet.
They're gone.
All right.
Yes.
What are your boys doing now, Pauli?
The younger boy is your environmental protection agent, ombudsman for the United States. And Bill is a golf pro and has his own athletic business.
Great. Well, it sounds like that they had good breakfasts and grew up to have wonderful lives.
Wonderful careers.
Great.
And Mark just received his PhD, so we're all kind of proud of him.
Well, I can imagine that you would be. Now, right next to that, we have actually going up and over to the side, so we might look at this piece next, something that's a real fantasy, particularly compared to the figurative quality of the boys.
Well, this is an early vapor trail, and when you first see the planes going up and you see this vapor trail in the air, and then there's this time when it just seems to explode and then it disappears, and that's kind of where the red dot kind of signifies that. And then you go up to this one, which is called Reflections, which is also a symbol of the early vapor trails.
And this is another just beautiful piece. Now, Pauli, you've really got a real smooth gradation here from what looks like opaque to transparent. Now, did you achieve that once again by using the layers of enamel there?
The least amount of enamel here, and then many, many coats until you get it just the dark shade you wish.
Okay, and you did fire between each coat?
Each coat is fired separately. You can't fire, well, you might be able to fire this and this, but most all enamel, being glass, fires at a different temperature. So none of them ever fire the same. So that's what makes it so difficult, is to learn the temperatures that all of these are fired.
So would you fire the highest flyer colors first and then the lower fire colors at the end?
At the end.
Okay.
The red dot here, now this little piece is transparent, so it could be fired about the same temperature as the rest of this piece. But this little dot is opaque, and it has to be fired separately. If it's fired too high, it burns out and just becomes a gray blob. And all of this, when you put it in the kiln, it's ready to fire, and you watch it through a little peephole, and you know when it gets almost 1500 degrees, when it looks real shiny and molten, and it has to come out at that second, because enamel is glass, and it wants to roll into a ball. And what you're trying to do is stretch it out, which is not its normal way of living. So that's what happens here. And the larger the piece, the more difficult. On the bowls we did, that wasn't so bad because they were kind of happy to be in a round atmosphere. But when you're stretching these out on a flat surface, it's more difficult.
Well, it sounds like you practically have to be an engineer as well as an artist to get one of these pieces to come out.
That's right. And this was the early color piece. And you saw not the final piece, but down the road you saw the Kachina one of the puzzle. And this was an early mixture of the geometric colors. This piece is called Paisley. And actually it has little silver foil here, and you use silver under cool colors like green and blue.
All right, that makes sense to me.
And you use gold under red and orange and yellow. And this is actually little tiny bits of foil.
So those little bits of foil were put onto the copper first, and then the enamel goes over the top.
Right in the center you can see almost no color at all. It's an undercoat, and it's all enameled. And then you lay these on with a little tiny brush.
Oh, okay.
And all the little pieces have tiny little holes that helps them to adhere to the background when it's fired. And then they're there forever. Then you can start building your color over them.
When we're looking at these, I might just ask you this question. Is this an old art form?
Very old art form. It actually started in Italy. The most famous enamels in the world were done by the artist Fabergé in Russia. Those pieces have just started now to come out in large collections. They've been hidden for many years. And they were basically gifts of the Tsar of Russia to Queen Mother Mary of England and some other people, other dignitaries, and now they're starting to collect those eggs. And there are some of these eggs on exhibit, I believe, in Dallas right now with a large Russian show.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, now next we have some pieces of pottery, and we have some masks. It looks to me like the masks are also enameled, and then you've combined some other very interesting materials with these. Why don't we start with that one over there by you?
So we go hundreds of years now from Fabergé's eggs, and at least 100 years. And these are enamel on copper. The little border around here is fine silver and beads and feathers and copper, beaten copper, and mounted on leather. These are just kind of spin-offs from the Hopi Indian Kachina dolls, just kind of an idea of the Southwest. It's not any definite design. This one is the same. It's cloisonné because there's silver wire laid on his nose and around his eyes, and he has silver eyes.
All right, and then this one over here by me looks like an owl.
Well, I have a fun story about that. That is an owl, and it's little bits of copper folded in a certain way so that it's copper, metal, enamel, copper, metal, enamel, and it actually was an experiment for Motorola once upon a time when they were into space kind of things. It was just to see how metal without using anything but glass to fuse it to metal would work.
I see.
And so they thought it was kind of interesting that an engineer should show up with the commission, and they were all, I did them in real bright colors, so they couldn't miss them.
They're wonderful.
This is just a piece of stone sculpture done with clay and stone. This is a little piece of fountain. The piece over here is just a large enamel headdress. Kind of the ideas from the Southwest. These are a pair. This is the flower kachina, the owl kachina, the sun kachina, and this is the ogre kachina. This is the great horn kachina. And now I made his headdress is out of clay. And I took lessons from a friend who taught me how to make clay beads. And another weaver friend taught me how to roll the yarn to make those little, the part of his headdress there. And his nose is fine silver. And that one is the female, this is the male. She has 3 scallops on her nose.
Well, now, Pauli, I guess it goes without saying that none of this is a happy accident.
That's true, Barbara. First you do the design in watercolor. Then from that it goes over to this piece here. Down here, early piece, all these colors, very similar, and they turn into a book jacket.
Okay. And is this your book?
This was done by Pauli Rothenberg, but it's a book on enameling and how to enamel.
Okay, and so you did the cover.
Yes.
Okay, now the last things that you've been working on are these wonderful pieces of handmade paper with the watercolors on top. So let's talk about this for a minute, Pauli.
All right, I'll tell you how I started to do this. My daughter thought I wasn't busy enough, so she called me one day from Sonoma County, California, up above San Francisco, and she said, I've enrolled us in Sonoma State University in a papermaking class. And you have 3 days to get here, and you're being accredited, so you better move it. I loved it. It was so different, and these are pure cotton lintners, and all of these are the same. In these, I've actually laid weeds and lychee nuts, and this is the 4th of July with the firecrackers. And I wanted to paint on them, and I didn't exactly know how to do the watercolor, but in experimenting I realized that the watercolor on a watercolor sheet of paper, the commercial piece of paper, it soaks in. With this, the water literally floats on top of the paper, and that's how I was able to get these designs. These are kites, and I put the strings in them, so when I was ready to do the piece, I had no idea what designs were going to be, and they already had the colors. These are just little rolled up pieces of paper tied with string and gold foil. This is my Lychee Dragon, and he's done with lychee nuts. The hulls of the lychee nuts are pressed in the paper.
Wow.
And you have one sheet of paper, put your design on it, and then another piece. And it's just gobs of fun. The only thing I don't have is a great big hydraulic press to squish the water out with. But otherwise, I love it.
Well, Pauli, they're wonderful, and we appreciate your being here for Focus on Art and sharing with us. For those of you at home, we appreciate your being with us as always.